Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and honestly, what better way to start 2019 than with a video that was supposed to come out in 2018? And when I say 2018, I mean seriously, like July 2018 with all our other class guides. But you know what? It's 8.1, there's a new raid on the horizon, and suddenly it's worth looking at this stuff again. So okay, today, Internet, we are talking tanks. Finally. Because look, you don't need me to tell you that being a tank is absolutely 100% the best job in the game. You get instant queues, you get to be as much of a dick as you want and no one can kick you. You get to watch overeager warlocks die horribly with nothing more than a simple, you pull it, you tank it bro, GG. And you get the quiet contentment of knowing that you are the best player in any group you're in, because if the other players were so good, they'd be tank, wouldn't they? That's science, you can't argue with science. So with those 8.1 changes nicely bedding in and the battle for Dazar'Alor looming on the new year horizon, how do the tanks currently measure up? What are their strengths and weaknesses? Which spec will see you stomp all over Jaina en route to cutting edge glory? Which spec will see you crank out high-end Mythic Plus keys like your Azeroth churning out videos when a new PTR hits? And which spec is going to give you the most fun doing it? All important questions, so join us as we look at the tank changes in 8.1 and find out who's best at what going into Battle for Azeroth Season 2, okay? Go, 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 go. Out of all of the tank classes in Battle for Azeroth, it's my trusty warrior that's seen the biggest noticeable changes coming into the new raid. Firstly, because, well, seriously, just look at him. He's a Maga Orc now. Couldn't have done that at the beginning of the expansion, so he's automatically twice as good than at launch, but also in changes to abilities and just boring old base numbers too, that make Prot substantially better at all of the things that it was good at in the first place. A hell of a lot more fluid to play, and a genuine option at the very highest levels of the game. And what is Prot Warrior good at exactly? Well, quite simply, blocking damage. Specifically, physical damage. When it comes to dealing with physical damage, Prot Warrior is really the best game in town, and that's great. I love the class fantasy of a hulking great warrior just planting their heels and taking whatever the enemy can throw at them square on the chin and sometimes shield. So Vanguard got a healthy buff in 8.1, which means straight out of the gate the spec has more effective health than before, and the reduction of shield blocks cooldown by 2 seconds doesn't sound like much, but that's just because you're not awesome at maths like me, or the people at Wowhead that actually worked out for me, because it equates to around 11% more active uptime of a core ability that blocks a ton of damage equals yes thanks, don't mind if I do. Probably the most important change of all though is to ignore pain and its removal from the global cooldown, because yes, we've heard a lot about the GCD atrocities in BFA, and whereas some classes could be forgiven for wondering what all the fuss is about, warriors are definitely not one of those classes, okay? They probably got hit harder with the GCD stick than anyone across their 3 specs, and for an example of how one little global cooldown can completely change the way an ability works, look no further than ignore pain. Because I get the thinking behind it, I do. Having it on the GCD created a choice for players: prevent damage now or generate rage to prevent damage later, which is, it's fine, I guess, but one swift GCD me later and suddenly the whole feel of the rotation is different, because now your choice is what to spend your resources on rather than whether to spend or not, which means you're using more rage, pressing more buttons, avoiding resource capping during cooldowns, and generally living your best sword and board life 2K18. Boom. And if you're a Maga Orc as well boom again. That's a double boom right there, enjoy it, you earned it. Add to that the fact that Intercept was also finally taken off the GCD after it was accidentally put on there, because that was clearly a mistake, right? I mean, there's no way anyone would have actually thought that was a good idea. And yeah, there's a reason top guilds were all getting a leveling shift on to have one ready for 8.1. But it's not all blowjobs and strawberries in Protland, because yeah, you're the kings of physical damage, but magic damage is still your nemesis, and you deal with bleeds about as well as the UK deals with Brexit negotiations. Basically what I'm saying is, when it's necrotic week in Mythic Plus, I wouldn't blame Prot Warriors if they just noped the shit out of it and spent time relaxing with a nice cup of tea and box set instead. Self-healing is still a bit rubbish too, but the whole point of a Prot Warrior is that it doesn't need healing, because it blocks so much damage before it even reaches your health bar. And with the numbers and gameplay now in place to back that up, this is a class which has become a genuine contender in 8.1. Okay, so here's the thing, and don't get me wrong, okay, because when we make these rankings, it's always far more useful to tell viewers what a class is good at rather than flat out say, this class is shit, don't bother. The subtitle of this video is, after all, who's best at what, not who's useless at everything, and until Shia LaBeouf becomes a playable tank class in WoW, that's going to continue to be the case, so please bear that in mind. Bear that in mind when I give you the bad news about Guardian Druid first, which is that technically, and by technically I mean by almost every objective measurement, like healing, sustainability, the amount of damage they take, etc., technically, Guardian Druids are kind of the actual worst tank in the game. But before we start getting all sad about that and unfriending all our bear-playing friends from Battle.net, let's clarify what it actually means. Because at mid-level play, all the tanks are perfectly viable right now. So if your ultimate ambition in the game is to raid Heroic, get your level 10 key every week, and just generally be having a good old furry time, then seriously, play Guardian Druid if that's your bag. It's not going to make the slightest bit of difference. But when you start venturing into higher keys or mythic progression raids though, don't be surprised if other players look at you like you're Tommy Wiseau auditioning for Hamlet, that's all I'm saying. The problems with Bear for top level play are pretty obvious. Frenzied Regeneration's change this expansion to a flat health regain is a massive downgrade from the Legion version of regeneration based on recent damage taken. They don't have the utility to be truly valuable in Mythic Plus content, even with Wild Charge off the GCD, and their damage is still low despite a hefty buff in 8.1. But that's not to say that they don't have some genuine value to talk about though. Number one, I think that Guardian Druid in Battle for Azeroth is the simplest tank class to play, both at a basic and optimal level, which makes it not just a great choice for people thinking of getting into tanking for the first time, and if that's you, welcome. Yes, hello, make yourself at home, have a biscuit, please become a tank, please, we need you. But also for raid leaders who want to be able to easily keep an eye on everything else happening in an encounter. And that's a genuine reason to appreciate this spec, even if you don't enjoy that very straightforward and, in my opinion, pretty ponderous style. And look, for all my talk of Guardian not having a place at the Mythic table, well, to be honest, that might not be entirely true either, because bears in 8.1 have one massive ace up their fuzzy sleeve, Stampeding Roar having its cooldown halved to 1 minute. Because in the right set of circumstances, this is a massive ability that can be used to mobilize an entire raid group out of hairy situation. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if cutting-edge teams didn't find a use for it somewhere in the upcoming raid. So Guardian does have value and is far from the write-off that you may have heard. It's not Shia LaBeouf is what I'm saying. So it's not exactly a secret that Brewmaster monks were the top dog for raiding at the start of Battle for Azeroth, but don't get too cocky there, monk players, because when it comes to 8.1, I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is that there have been nerfs to your toolkit. Black Ox statue has had its radius reduced by 10 yards, and much more importantly, Stagger, the spec's core ability, has seen its stagger reduced by around 3%, so you know, bad times. The good news is that those changes are absolutely meaningless and have no real effect whatsoever, and Brewmaster Monk is still the toppest pick for progression raiding, for one very simple reason: they are the hardest to kill. That nerf but not really stagger mechanic is just so effective at leveling out incoming hits. Look, I had some toast with an egg for breakfast today. Veganuary isn't going too well if I'm honest, but if I was a Brewmaster monk, I'd have had toast with some burst damage on it, because that's what, I mean, monks eat burst damage for breakfast. And that's why when you see the very top guilds heading into battle for Dazar'Alor, they are more than likely going to have a Brewmaster leading the line. Certainly initially, because when you're progressing fights and working out new bosses and mechanics, you want to be able to see as much of each encounter as you can in every pull. And even though they need more healing than other tank specs, Monk's sheer survivability is going to give you that. So with all that in mind, it's just as well that it's also a beauty to play too. We've described Brewmasters in previous tank videos as being the connoisseur's choice, having an intricate and involved toolset with a high skill ceiling. And even though, like most specs, BFA has seen that deliciousness simplified slightly, it's still one of the most engaging tanks when it comes to the pressing of the buttons, in my opinion. There's the obvious cons like a lack of self-healing, meaning that you're relying on your healers more than the other tanks, and the fact that, as always, they feel like they're just one big damage reduction cooldown short of the full set. But honestly, that's like complaining that Idris Elba could have longer legs. It's definitely true, but it really doesn't make them any less awesome in the grand scheme of things, does it? Blood Death Knights have been having a good time in Battle for Azeroth so far, and though 8.1 hit them harder than probably any other tank, they are still a super solid choice with a satisfying playstyle and my own personally favourite tank class to play in Tides of Vengeance. But first, those nerfs. The most important is probably Veteran of the Third War, which has had its armour bonus removed, and for the longest time on the 8.1 PTR, it looked like Bone Shield was getting a nice buff to compensate, but that never happened in the end, and you really feel that lack of armour now, which is sad sad times, but the actual most important is Bone Storm, having its healing capped at 15%, or the equivalent of hitting just 5 enemies with the ability, which is a real shame for those of us who enjoyed the simple pleasures of pulling hundreds of dungeon mobs and becoming completely invincible as we stood there watching them all die to our blown splattering awesomeness. But alas, no more, and what with Will of the Necropolis reducing less incoming damage and needing a lower minimum health to proc, there's no doubt that Blood is objectively weaker this patch than last. To be honest though, that shouldn't matter too much, especially in dungeons, where their self-sufficient healing style is just always going to be really effective, as well as being incredibly engaging to play. And the great thing about having a mitigation based on self-healing is that Blood DKs don't need to give a shit about what kind of damage they take. Physical, magical, whatever, load them up, they're going to heal it anyway. Vampiric Blood is still one of the most useful cooldowns on the market, and their 2 different grip abilities give them totally unique utility. It's true that their spiky health style leaves them at a bit of a disadvantage when it comes to dealing with really large bursts of tank damage, but if you can survive the hit, then there's no one better at recovering from it than the Blood DK. The important thing is that no one is going to be disappointed if you turn up with a Death Knight to tank just about any in-game activity. And yeah, that's right, I didn't mention mobility because they haven't got any. You can pull shit towards you, get over it! Look, let's be honest, you all know what I'm going to say about Protection Paladin right now. It's been the same old story with them for a couple of expansions now, hasn't it? They are the kings of group and raid-wide utility. They've got about 15 different shield cooldowns to cool upon, their rotation pretty much plays itself, you press the ability when it's ready. They look great because, you know, the light and stuff, now with added books in 8.1, awesome. And yes, all of this is true. To a point. Because yeah, they do have great utility, especially now Hand of the Protector heals based on the target's missing health, after Blizzard accidentally made it your missing health, because that was clearly a mistake, right? I mean, there's no way anyone would have actually thought that was a good idea. They've got spell warding, they've got lay on hands, they can make caster mobs their bitches with their awesome shield throwing interruptive awesomeness. They are obviously going to be your go-to Mythic Plus tanks, right? Right, Taliesin? I mean, that sounds great for Mythic Plus, right? Okay, so look, the thing is, outside of those big cooldowns, Prot Paladin is actually relatively squishy for a metal-plated knight wearing a suit of metal, and with no AoE stun, snare, or any real kiting ability, they're just not all that good at dealing with unexpected damage. What they can be really useful for, though, is as a supporting raid tank, especially in fights that you're not learning from scratch, where you get all of that lovely extra support and utility, and suddenly it doesn't matter so much that you feel nervous every time someone hits you without Shield of the Righteous up, because you're tank swapping half the fight and you have it up pretty much whenever you need to. When your mitigation is cooldown based, then a long fight where you're only taking damage 50% of the time is right up your alley, especially when you can have other genuine uses in the meantime, and that is something that Prot Paladins absolutely do have. It's not something that you're going to be able to take full advantage of on every fight, obviously, but there are going to be times when a Paladin bag of tricks can really help the team out, so don't be afraid to use it. And the Legion Mage Tower Morning Star appearance, obviously. Always use that too, because seriously, look at it, come on. Placing Demon Hunter as my most fun class is an obvious choice, but it comes with some pretty big caveats. On the face of it, there's not much to argue here. The most recent addition to the tanking roster is simple in a good way, incredibly fast and mobile, has jumping about and charging as part of its basic rotation, self-healing all over the shop, awesome damage and CC, basically untouched by the GCD, and more explosions than Michael Bay making a movie about a gas leak at a firework factory. This is a stupid spec which is pure joy from start to finish if you take Fracture. As in, if you don't take the actual optimum talent, because my god, does all that jumpy slashy explodey fun times take a hit if you don't take Fracture and you're left non-stop shearing for days on end. This isn't an argument, okay? We're not having a discussion here, don't at me, take Fracture, have fun, life is too short. So good, now that we've all taken Fracture and we're having the ride of our young lives playing Vengeance, let's ask the obvious question. Why isn't everyone playing Vengeance Demon Hunter? Well, the thing is, while they are a predictably solid choice for Mythic Plus, where their DPS is outrageous, their sigils and Chaos Brand super useful, and their slight squishiness outside of Demon Spikes not such a big deal because they do the whole jumpy kitey thing better than anyone, in Raid, it's a much sadder story. Because, and obviously this is on a fight-by-fight basis, but generally, those cool Vengeance utility effects are pretty useless in raid encounters, and that Spirit Bomb-based healing not nearly as effective in single target fights. Basically, Vengeance just doesn't have the numbers to make it a first-choice, top-tier raid tank. And combined with the fact that Havoc is in a pretty good DPS spot right now, so you might as well play that in raids, it's easy to see why Demon Hunter tanks aren't quite as numerous as you might expect. And honestly, it's hard to feel too upset about that when a class is this much fun to press buttons for, and you will definitely agree unless you don't take Fracture. But what do you guys think? How do you rate my ratings of the tanks? What will you be playing in Tides of Vengeance? What tank is your guild taking into the battle for Dazar'Alor? And most importantly of all, how am I totally wrong about everything I have said? Let us know in the comments below. And thanks for joining us today. If you like this video, don't thank us, thank our patrons who give their actual real life money to make them all happen. And seriously, do thank them, because without them, there would be a whole lot less Taliesin and Evitel. If you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. Remember, my name is the Lazy Peon. No, from me and Evitel too. Until next time, cheerio.